Chapters 21 and 22 of Don Quixote, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Don Quixote, Volume 2, by Miguel de Cervantes Saavedra, translated by John Ormsby. Chapter 21, in which Camacho's wedding is continued with other delightful incidents. While Don Quixote and Sancho were engaged in the discussion set forth the last chapter, they heard loud shouts and a great noise, which were uttered and made by the men on the mares as they went at full gallop, shouting to receive the bride and bridegroom, who were approaching with musical instruments and pageantry of all sorts around them, and accompanied by the priest and the relatives of both, and all the most distinguished people of the surrounding villages. When Sancho saw the bride, he exclaimed, "By my faith, she is not dressed like a country girl, but like some fine court lady. Egad, as well as I can make out, the patina she wears rich coral, and her green Cuenca stuff is 30-pile velvet, and then the white linen trimming, by my oath, but it's satin. Look at her hands, jet rings on them. May I never have luck if they're not gold rings, and real gold, and set with pearls as white as a curdled milk, and every one of them worth an eye of one's head. Horse-on baggage, what hair she has! If it's not a wig, I never saw longer or fairer all the days of my life. See how bravely she bears herself, and her shape! Wouldn't you say she was like a walking palm tree, loaded with clusters of dates? For the trinkets she has hanging from her hair and neck look just like them. I swear in my heart she is a brave lass, and fit to pass over the banks of Flanders." Don Quixote laughed at Sancho's boorish eulogies, and thought that, saving his lady Dulcinea del Toboso, he had never seen a more beautiful woman. The fair Quiteria appeared somewhat pale, which was no doubt because of the bad night brides always pass, dressing themselves out for their wedding on the morrow. They advanced towards a theater that stood on one side of the meadow, decked with carpets and boughs, where they were to plight their troth, and from which they were to behold the dances and plays. But at the moment of their arrival at the spot they heard a loud outcry behind them, and a voice exclaiming, "Wait a little, ye as inconsiderate as ye are hasty." At these words all turned round, and perceived that the speaker was a man clad in what seemed to be a loose black coat, garnished with crimson patches like flames. He was crowned, as was presently seen, with a crown of gloomy cypress, and in his hand he held a long staff. As he approached, he was recognized by everyone as the gay Basilio, and all waited anxiously to see what would come of his words, in dread of some catastrophe in consequence of his appearance at such a moment. He came up at last, weary and breathless, and planting himself in front of the bridal pair, drove his staff, which had a steel spike at the end, into the ground, and with a pale face and eyes fixed on Quiteria, he thus addressed her in a hoarse, trembling voice: "Well dost thou know, ungrateful Quiteria, that according to the holy law we acknowledge, so long as live thou canst take no husband, nor art thou ignorant either that, in my hopes that time and my own exertions would improve my fortunes, I have never failed to observe the respect due to thy honor. But thou, casting behind thee all thou owest to my true love, wouldst surrender what is mine to another, whose wealth serves to bring him not only good fortune, but supreme happiness. And now, to complete it, not that I think he deserves it, but inasmuch as heaven is pleased to bestow it upon him, I will with my own hands do away with the obstacle that may interfere with it, and remove myself from between you. Long live the rich Camacho! Many a happy year may he live with the ungrateful Quiteria, and let the poor Basilio die, Basilio whose poverty clipped the wings of his happiness and brought him to the grave." And so saying, he seized the staff he had riven into the ground, and leaving one half of it fixed there, showed it to be a sheath that concealed a tolerably long rapier, and what may be called its hilt being planted in the ground, he swiftly, coolly, and deliberately threw himself upon it, and in an instant the bloody point and half the steel blade appeared at his back. The unhappy man, falling to the earth, bathed in his blood and transfixed by his own weapon. His friends at once ran to his aid, filled with grief at his misery and sad fate, and Don Quixote, dismounting from Rocinante, hastened to support him, and took him in his arms, and found he had not yet ceased to breathe. They were about to draw out the rapier, but the priest, who was standing by, objected to its being withdrawn before he had confessed him, as the instant of its withdrawal would be that of his death. Basilio, however, reviving slightly, said in a weak voice, as though in pain, "If thou wouldst consent, cruel Quiteria, to give me thy hand as my bride in this last fatal moment, I might still hope that my rashness would find pardon, as by its means I attained the bliss of being thine." Hearing this, the priest bade him think of the welfare of his soul rather than of the cravings of the body, and in all earnestness implore God's pardon for his sins and for his rash resolve, to which Basilio replied that he was determined not to confess until Quiteria first gave him her hand in marriage, for that happiness would compose his mind and give him courage to make his confession. Don Quixote, hearing the wounded man's entreaty, exclaimed aloud that what Basilio asked was just and reasonable, and moreover a request that might be easily complied with, and that it would be as much to Signor Camacho's honor to receive the lady Quiteria as the widow of the brave Basilio, as if he received her direct from her father. "In this case," said he, "it will be only to say yes, and no consequences can follow the utterances of the word, for the nuptial couch of this marriage must be the grave." Camacho was listening to all this, perplexed and bewildered, and not knowing what to say or do, but so urgent were the entreaties of Basilio's friends, imploring him to allow Quiteria to give him her hand, so that his soul, quitting this life in despair, should not be lost, that they moved, nay, forced him to say that if Quiteria were willing to give it, he was satisfied, as it was only putting off the fulfillment of his wishes for a moment. At once all assailed Quiteria and pressed her, some with prayers, and others with tears, and others with persuasive arguments, to give her hand to poor Basilio; but she, harder than marble and more unmoved than any statue, seemed unable or unwilling to utter a word, nor would she have given any reply had not the priest bade her decide quickly what she meant to do, as Basilio now had his soul at his teeth, and there was no time for hesitation. On this the fair Quiteria, to all appearance distressed, grieved, and repentant, advanced without a word to where Basilio lay, his eyes already turned in his head, his breathing short and painful, murmuring the name of Quiteria between his teeth, and apparently about to die like a heathen and not like a Christian. Quiteria approached him, and, kneeling, demanded his hand by signs, without speaking. Basilio opened his eyes, and gazing fixedly at her, said, "O Quiteria, why hast thou turned compassionate at a moment when thy compassion will serve as a dagger to rob me of my life? For I have not now the strength left, either to bear the happiness thou givest me in accepting me as thine, or to suppress the pain that is rapidly drawing the dread shadow of death over my eyes. What I entreat of thee, O thou fatal star to me, is that the hand thou demandest of me, and wouldst give me, be not given out of compliance, or to deceive me afresh, but that thou confess and declare that without any constraint upon thy will thou givest it to me as thy lawful husband. For it is not meet that thou shouldst trifle with me at such a moment as this, or have recourse to falsehoods with one who has dealt so truly by thee. While uttering these words he showed such weakness that the bystanders expected each return of faintness would take his life with it. Then Quiteria, overcome with modesty and shame, holding in her right hand the hand of Basilio, said, "No force would bend my will. As freely, therefore, as it is possible for me to do so, I give thee the hand of a lawful wife, and take thine, if thou givest it to me, of thine own free will, untroubled and unaffected by the calamity thy hasty act has brought upon thee." "Yes, I give it," said Basilio, "not agitated or distracted, but with unclouded reason that heaven is pleased to grant me. Thus do I give myself to be thy husband." "And I give myself to be thy wife," said Quiteria, "whether thou livest many years, or they carry thee from my arms to the grave." "For one so badly wounded," observed Sancho at this point, "this young man has a great deal to say. They should make him leave off billing and cooing and attend to his soul, for to my thinking he has it more on his tongue than at his teeth." Basilio and Quiteria having thus joined hands, the priest, deeply moved and with tears in his eyes, pronounced the blessing upon them, and implored heaven to grant an easy passage to the soul of the newly wedded man, who, the instant he received the blessing, started nimbly to his feet, and with unparalleled effrontery pulled out the rapier that had been sheathed in his body. All the bystanders were astounded, and some, more simple than inquiring, began shouting, "A miracle! A miracle!" But Basilio replied, "No miracle, no miracle, only a trick, a trick." The priest, perplexed and amazed, made haste to examine the wound with both hands, and found that the blade had passed not through Basilio's flesh and ribs, but through a hollow iron tube full of blood, which he had adroitly fixed at the place, the blood, as was afterwards ascertained, having been so prepared as not to congeal. In short, the priest and Camacho and most of those present saw they were tricked and made fools of. The bride showed no signs of displeasure at the deception. On the contrary, hearing them say that the marriage, being fraudulent, would not be valid, she said that she confirmed it afresh, whence they all concluded that the affair had been planned by agreement and understanding between the pair, whereat Camacho and his supporters were so mortified that they proceeded to revenge themselves by violence, and a great number of them, drawing their swords, attacked Basilio, in whose protection as many more swords were in an instant unsheathed, while Don Quixote, taking the lead on horseback, with his lance over his arm and well covered with his shield, made all give way before him. Sancho, who never found any pleasure or enjoyment in such doings, retreated to the wine jars from which he had taken his delectable skimmings, considering that, as a holy place, that spot would be respected. "Hold, sirs, hold!" cried Don Quixote in a loud voice. "We have no right to take vengeance for wrongs that love may do to us. Remember, love and war are the same thing, and as in war it is allowable and common to make use of wiles and stratagems to overcome an enemy, so in the contests and rivalries of love the tricks and devices employed to attain the desired end are justifiable, provided they be not to the discredit or dishonor of the loved object. Quiteria belonged to Basilio, and Basilio to Quiteria by the just and beneficent disposal of heaven. Camacho is rich and can purchase his pleasure, when, where, and as it pleases him. Basilio has but this ewe lamb, and no one, however powerful he may be, shall take her from him. These two whom God hath joined, man cannot separate, and he who attempts it must first pass the point of this lance. And so saying, he brandished it so stoutly and so dexterously that he overawed all who did not know him. But so deep an impression had the rejection of Quiteria made on Camacho's mind, that it banished her at once from his thoughts. And so the counsels of the priest, who was a wise and kindly disposed man, prevailed with him, and by their means he and his partisans were pacified and tranquilized, and to prove it put up their swords again, inveighing against the pliancy of Quiteria rather than the craftiness of Basilio. Camacho maintaining that, if Quiteria as a maiden had such a love for Basilio, she would have loved him too as a married woman, and that he ought to thank heaven more for having taken her than for having given her. Camacho and those of his following, therefore, being consoled and pacified, those on Basilio's side were appeased, and the rich Camacho, to show that he felt no resentment for the trick, and did not care about it, desired the festival to go on just as if he were married in reality. Neither Basilio, however, nor his bride, nor the followers would take any part in it, and they withdrew to Basilio's village. For the poor, if they are persons of virtue and good sense, have those who follow, honor, and uphold them, just as the rich have those who flatter and dance attendance on them. With them they carried Don Quixote, regarding him as a man of worth and a stout one. Sancho alone had a cloud on his soul, for he found himself debarred from waiting for Camacho's splendid feast and festival, which lasted until night, and thus dragged away, he moodily followed his master, who accompanied Basilio's party, and left behind him the flesh pots of Egypt, though in his heart he took them with him, and their now nearly finished skimmings that he carried in the bucket conjured up visions before his eyes of the glory and abundance, of the good cheer he was losing. And so, vexed and dejected, though not hungry, without dismounting from Dapple, he followed in the footsteps of Rocinante. End chapter 21. Chapter 22, wherein is related the grand adventure of the cave of Montesinos in the heart of La Mancha, which the valiant Don Quixote brought to a happy termination. Many and great were the attentions shown to Don Quixote by the newly married couple, who felt themselves under an obligation to him for coming forward in defense of their cause, and they exalted his wisdom to the same level with his courage, rating him as a Cid in arms and a Cicero in eloquence. Worthy Sancho enjoyed himself for 3 days at the expense of the pair, from whom they learned that the sham wound was not a scheme arranged with the fair Quiteria, but a device of Basilio's, who counted on exactly the result they had seen. He confessed, it is true, that he had confided his idea to some of his friends, so that at the proper time they might aid him in his purpose and ensure the success of the deception. That, said Don Quixote, is not and ought not to be called deception, which aims at virtuous ends. And the marriage of lovers he maintained to be a most excellent end, reminding them, however, that love has no greater enemy than hunger and constant want. For love is all gaiety, enjoyment, and happiness, especially when the lover is in the possession of the object of his love. And poverty and want are the declared enemies of all these, which he said to urge Signor Basilio to abandon the practice of those accomplishments he was skilled in, for though they brought him fame, they brought him no money, and apply himself to the acquisition of wealth by legitimate industry, which will never fail those who are prudent and persevering. The poor man who is a man of honor, if indeed a poor man can be a man of honor, has a jewel when he has a fair wife, and if she is taken from him, his honor is taken from him and slain. The fair woman who is a woman of honor, and whose husband is poor, deserves to be crowned with the laurels and crowns of victory and triumph. Beauty by itself attracts the desires of all who behold it, and the royal eagles and birds of towering flight stoop on it as a dainty lure. But if beauty be accompanied by want and penury, then the ravens and the kites and other birds of prey assail it, and she who stands firm against such attacks well deserves to be called the crown of her husband. Remember, O prudent Basilio, added Don Quixote, it was the opinion of a certain sage, I know not whom, that there was not more than one good woman in the whole world, and his advice was that each one should think and believe that this one good woman was his own wife, and in this way he would live happy. I myself am not married, nor, so far, has it ever entered my thoughts to be so. Nevertheless, I would venture to give advice to anyone who might ask it as to the mode in which he should seek a wife such as he would be content to marry. The first thing I would recommend him would be to look to good name rather than to wealth, for a good woman does not win a good name merely by being good, but by letting it be seen that she is so. And open looseness and freedom do much more damage to a woman's honor than secret depravity. If you take a good woman into your house, it will be an easy matter to keep her good, and even to make her still better. But if you take a bad one, you will find it hard work to mend her, for it is no very easy matter to pass from one extreme to another. I do not say it is impossible, but I look upon it as difficult. Sancho, listening to all this, said to himself, this master of mine, when I say anything that has weight and substance, says I might take a pulpit in hand and go about the world preaching fine sermons. But I say of him that when he begins stringing maxims together and giving advice, not only might he take a pulpit in hand, but two on each finger, and go into the marketplaces to his heart's content. Devil take you for a knight errant, what a lot of things you know! I used to think in my heart that the only thing he knew was what belonged to his chivalry, but there is nothing he won't have a finger in. Sancho muttered this somewhat aloud, and his master overheard him, and asked, what art thou muttering there, Sancho? I'm not saying anything or muttering anything, said Sancho. I was only saying to myself that I wish I had heard what your worship has said just now, before I married. Perhaps I'd say now, the ox that's loose licks himself well. Is I Teresa so bad then, Sancho? She is not very bad, replied Sancho, but she is not very good. At least she is not as good as I could wish. Thou dost wrong, Sancho, said Don Quixote, to speak ill of thy wife, for after all she is the mother of thy children. We are quits, returned Sancho, for she speaks ill of me whenever she takes it into her head, especially when she is jealous, and Satan himself could not put up with her then. In fine, they remained 3 days with the newly married couple, by whom they were entertained and treated like kings. Don Quixote begged the fencing licentiate to find him a guide to show him the way to the cave of Montesinos, as he had a great desire to enter it and see with his own eyes if the wonderful tales that were told of it all over the country were true. The licentiate said he would get him a cousin of his own, a famous scholar, and one very much given to reading books of chivalry, who would have great pleasure in conducting him to the mouth of the very cave, and would show him the lakes of Ruidera, which were likewise famous all over La Mancha, and even all over Spain, and he assured him he would find him entertaining, for he was a youth who could write books good enough to be printed and dedicated to princes. The cousin arrived at last, leading an ass in foal, with a pack saddle covered with a party-colored carpet or sackcloth. Sancho saddled Rocinante, got Dapple ready, and stocked his alforjas, along with which went those of the cousin, likewise well filled, and so, commending themselves to God, and bidding farewell to all, they set out, taking the road for the famous cave of Montesinos. On the way Don Quixote asked the cousin of what sort and character his pursuits, avocations, and studies were, to which he replied that he was by profession a humanist, and that his pursuits and studies were making books for the press, all of great utility and no less entertainment to the nation. One was called the Book of Liveries, in which he described 703 liveries, with their colors, mottoes, and ciphers, from which gentlemen of the court might pick and choose any they fancied for festivals and revels, without having to go a-begging for them from any one, or puzzling their brains, as the saying is, to have them appropriate to their objects and purpose. For, said he, I give the jealous, the rejected, the forgotten, the absent, what will suit them, and fit them without fail. I have another book, too, which I shall call Metamorphoses, or the Spanish Ovid, one of rare and original invention, for imitating Ovid in burlesque style. I show in it who the Giralda of Seville and the Angel of the Magdalena were, what the sewer of Besinguera at Cordova was, what the bulls of Guisando, the Sierra Morena, the Legitanos, and the Lavapis fountains at Madrid, not forgetting those of the Piojo, of the Cano Dorado, and of the Priora, all with their allegories, metaphors, and changes, so that they are amusing, interesting, and instructive all at once. Another book I have, which I call the Supplement to Polydore Virgil, which treats of the invention of things, and is a work of great erudition and research, for I establish and elucidate elegantly some things of great importance, which Polydore omitted to mention. He forgot to tell us who was the first man in the world that had a cold in his head, and who was the first to try salivation for the French disease. But I give it accurately set forth, and quote more than 25 authors in proof of it, so you may perceive I have labored to good purpose, and that the book will be of service to the whole world. Sancho, who had been very attentive to the cousin's words, said to him, Tell me, Signor, and God give you luck in printing your books, can you tell me, for of course you know, as you know everything, who was the first man that scratched his head? For to my thinking it must have been our father Adam. So it must, replied the cousin, for there is no doubt that Adam had a head and hair, and being the first man in the world, he would have scratched himself sometimes. So I think, said Sancho. But now tell me, who was the first tumbler in the world? Really, brother, answered the cousin, I could not at this moment say positively, without having investigated it. I will look it up when I go back to where I have my books, and will satisfy you the next time we meet, for this will not be the last time. Look here, Signor, said Sancho, don't give yourself any trouble about it, for I have just this minute hit upon what I asked you. The first tumbler in the world, you must know, was Lucifer, when they cast or pitched him out of heaven, for he came tumbling into the bottomless pit. You are right, friend, said the cousin. And said Don Quixote, Sancho, that question and answer are not thine own. Thou hast heard them from some one else. Hold your peace, Signor, said Sancho. Faith, if I take to asking questions and answering, I'll go on from this till tomorrow morning. Nay, to ask foolish things and answer nonsense, I needn't go looking for help from my neighbors. Thou hast said more than thou art aware of, Sancho, said Don Quixote, for there are some who weary themselves out in learning and proving things that, after they are known and proved, are not worth a farthing to the understanding or memory. In this and other pleasant conversation the day went by, and that night they put up at a small hamlet, whence it was not more than 2 leagues to the cave of Montesinos. So the cousin told Don Quixote, adding that if he was bent upon entering it, it would be requisite for him to provide himself with ropes, so that he might be tied and lowered into its depths. Don Quixote said that even if it reached to the bottomless pit, he meant to see where it went to. So they bought about 100 fathoms of rope,
And next day at 2 in the afternoon they arrived at the cave, the mouth of which is spacious and wide, but full of thorn and wild fig bushes and brambles and briars, so thick and matted that they completely close it up and cover it over. On coming within sight of it, the cousin, Sancho, and Don Quixote dismounted, and the first two immediately tied the latter very firmly with ropes, and as they were girding and swathing him, Sancho said to him, "Mind what you are about, master mine. Don't go burying yourself alive, or putting yourself where you'll be like a bottle put to cool in a well. It's no affair or business of your worships to become the explorer of this, which must be worse than a Moorish dungeon." "Tie me and hold thy peace," said Don Quixote, "for an emprise like this, friend Sancho, was reserved for me." And said the guide, "I beg of you, Señor Don Quixote, to observe carefully and examine with 100 eyes everything that is within there. Perhaps there may be some things for me to put into my book of transformations." "The drum is in hands that will know how to beat it well enough," said Sancho Panza. When he had said this and finished the tying, which was not over the armor, but only over the doublet, Don Quixote observed, "It was careless of us not to have provided ourselves with a small cattle bell to be tied on the rope close to me, the sound of which would show that I was still descending and alive. But as that is out of the question now, in God's hand be it to guide me." And forthwith he fell on his knees, and in a low voice offered up a prayer to heaven, imploring God to aid him and grant him success in this, to all appearance, perilous and untried adventure, and then exclaimed aloud, "O mistress of my actions and movements, illustrious and peerless Dulcinea del Toboso, if so be the prayers and supplications of this fortunate lover can reach thy ears by thy incomparable beauty, I entreat thee to listen to them, for they but ask thee not to refuse me thy favor and protection, now that I stand in such need of them. I am about to precipitate, to sink, to plunge myself into the abyss that is here before me, only to let the world know that while thou dost favor me there is no impossibility I will not attempt and accomplish." With these words he approached the cavern, and perceived that it was impossible to let himself down or effect an entrance, except by sheer force or cleaving a passage. So drawing his sword, he began to demolish and cut away the brambles at the mouth of the cave, at the noise of which a vast multitude of crows and choughs flew out of it so thick and so fast that they knocked Don Quixote down, and if he had been as much of a believer in augury as he was a Catholic Christian, he would have taken it as a bad omen, and declined to bury himself in such a place. He got up, however, and as there came no more crows or night birds like the bats that flew out at the same time with the crows, the cousin and Sancho giving him rope, he lowered himself into the depths of the dread cavern, and as he entered it, Sancho sent his blessing after him, making 1,000 crosses over him, and saying, "God and the Pena de Francia and the Trinity of Gaeta guide thee, flower and cream of knights errant. There thou goest, thou dare devil of the earth, heart of steel, arm of brass. Once more God guide thee and send thee back safe, sound, and unhurt to the light of this world thou art leaving, to bury thyself in the darkness thou art seeking there." And the cousin offered up almost the same prayers and supplications. Don Quixote kept calling to them to give him rope, and more rope, and they gave it out little by little, and by the time the calls, which came out of the cave as out of a pipe, ceased to be heard, they had let down the 100 fathoms of rope. They were inclined to pull Don Quixote up again, as they could give him no more rope. However, they waited about half an hour, at the end of which time they began to gather in the rope again, with great ease and without feeling any weight, which made them fancy Don Quixote was remaining below, and persuaded that it was so, Sancho wept bitterly, and hauled away in great haste in order to settle the question. When, however, they had come to, as it seemed, rather more than 80 fathoms, they felt a weight, at which they were greatly delighted, and at last at 10 fathoms more they saw Don Quixote distinctly, and Sancho called out to him, saying, "Welcome back, Signor, for we had begun to think you were going to stop there to found a family." But Don Quixote answered not a word, and drawing him out entirely, they perceived he had his eyes shut, and every appearance of being fast asleep. They stretched him out on the ground and untied him, but still he did not awake. However, they rolled him back and forwards, and shook and pulled him about, so that after some time he came to himself, stretching himself just as if he were waking up from a deep and sound sleep. And looking about him, he said, "God forgive you, friends, ye have taken me away from the sweetest and most delightful existence and spectacle that ever human being enjoyed or beheld. Now indeed do I know that all the pleasures of this life pass away like a shadow and a dream, or fade like the flower of the field. O ill-fated Montesinos! O sore wounded Durandarte! O unhappy Belerma! O tearful Guadiana! And ye, O hapless daughters of Ruidera, who show in your waves the tears that flowed from your beauteous eyes." The cousin and Sancho Panza listened with deep attention to the words of Don Quixote, who uttered them as though with immense pain he drew them up from his very bowels. They begged of him to explain himself, and tell them what he had seen in that hell down there. "Hell, do you call it?" said Don Quixote. "Call it by no such name, for it does not deserve it, as ye shall soon see." He then begged them to give him something to eat, as he was very hungry. They spread the cousin's sackcloth on the grass, and put the stores of the alforjas into requisition, and all three sitting down lovingly and sociably, they made a luncheon and a supper of it all in one. And when the sackcloth was removed, Don Quixote of La Mancha said, "Let no one rise and attend to me, my sons, both of you." End chapter 22. Don Quixote de la Mancha, Book 2, Chapters 21 and 22, read for you by Ted DeLorme in Fort Mill, South Carolina. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain.
'23 and 24 of Don Quixote, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by John Leader. Don Quixote, Volume 2, by Miguel de Cervantes Saavedra. Translated by John Ormsby. Chapter 23. Of the wonderful things the incomparable Don Quixote said he saw in the profound cave of Montesinos, the impossibility and magnitude of which caused this adventure to be deemed apocryphal. It was about 4 in the afternoon when the sun, veiled in clouds, with subdued light and tempered beams, enabled Don Quixote to relate, without heat or inconvenience, what he had seen in the cave of Montesinos to his 2 illustrious hearers, and he began as follows. "A matter of some 12 or 14 times a man's height down in this pit, on the right-hand side, there is a recess or space roomy enough to contain a large cart with its mules. A little light reaches it through some chinks or crevices, communicating with it and open to the surface of the earth. This recess or space I perceived when I was already growing weary and disgusted at finding myself hanging suspended by the rope, travelling downwards into that dark region without any certainty or knowledge of where I was going, so I resolved to enter it and rest myself for a while. I called out, telling you not to let out more rope until I bade you, but you cannot have heard me. I then gathered in the rope you are sending me, and making a coil or pile of it, I seated myself upon it, ruminating and considering what I was to do to lower myself to the bottom, having no one to hold me up.
And as I was thus deep in thought and perplexity, suddenly and without provocation a profound sleep fell upon me, and when I least expected it, I know not how, I awoke and found myself in the midst of the most beautiful, delightful meadow that nature could produce, or the most lively human imagination conceive. I opened my eyes, I rubbed them, and found I was not asleep but thoroughly awake. Nevertheless, I felt my head and breast to satisfy myself whether it was I myself who was there, or some empty delusive phantom. But touch, feeling, the collected thoughts that passed through my mind, all convinced me that I was the same then and there that I am this moment. Next there presented itself to my sight a stately royal palace or castle, with walls that seemed built of clear transparent crystal, and through two great doors that opened wide therein, I saw coming forth and advancing towards me a venerable old man, clad in a long gown of mulberry-coloured serge that trailed upon the ground. On his shoulders and breast he had a green satin collegiate hood, and covering his head a black Milanese bonnet, and his snow-white beard fell below his girdle. He carried no arms whatever, nothing but a rosary of beads bigger than fair-sized filberts, each 10th bead being like a moderate ostrich egg. His bearing, his gait, his dignity, and imposing presence held me spellbound and wondering. He approached me, and the first thing he did was to embrace me closely, and then he said to me, "For a long time now, O valiant knight Don Quixote of La Mancha, we who are here enchanted in these solitudes have been hoping to see thee, that thou mayest make known to the world what is shut up and concealed in this deep cave called the Cave of Montesinos, which thou hast entered, an achievement reserved for thy invincible heart and stupendous courage alone to attempt. Come with me, illustrious sir, and I will show thee the marvels hidden within this transparent castle, whereof I am the alcaide and perpetual warden, for I am Montesinos himself, from whom the cave takes its name." The instant he told me he was Montesinos, I asked him if the story they told in the world above here was true, that he had taken out the heart of his great friend Durandarte from his breast with a little dagger, and carried it to the Lady Bellarma, as his friend when at the point of death had commanded him. He said in reply that they spoke the truth in every respect except as to the dagger, for it was not a dagger, nor little, but a burnished poniard, sharper than an awl.
"That poniard must have been made by Ramon de Hoces the Sevillian," said Sancho.
"I do not know," said Don Quixote. "It could not have been by that poniard maker, however, because Ramon de Hoces was a man of yesterday, and the affair of Roncesvalles, where this mishap occurred, was long ago. But the question is of no great importance, nor does it affect or make any alteration in the truth or substance of the story." "That is true," said the cousin. "Continue, Señor Don Quixote, for I am listening to you with the greatest pleasure in the world." "And with no less do I tell the tale," said Don Quixote, "and so to proceed. The venerable Montesinos led me into the palace of crystal, where, in a lower chamber, strangely cool and entirely of alabaster, was an elaborately wrought marble tomb, upon which I beheld, stretched at full length, a knight, not of bronze, or marble, or jasper, as are seen on other tombs, but of actual flesh and bone. His right hand, which seemed to me somewhat hairy and sinewy, a sign of great strength in its owner, lay on the side of his heart; but before I could put any question to Montesinos, he, seeing me gazing at the tomb in amazement, said to me, 'This is my friend Durandarte, flower and mirror of the true lovers and valiant knights of his time. He is held enchanted here, as I myself and many others are, by that French enchanter Merlin, who, they say, was the devil's son. But My belief is, not that he was the devil's son, but that he knew, as the saying is, a point more than the devil. How or why he enchanted us, no one knows, but time will tell, and I suspect that time is not far off. What I marvel at is, that I know it to be as sure as that it is now day that Durandarte ended his life in my arms, and that, after his death, I took out his heart with my own hands, and indeed it must have weighed more than 2 pounds, for, according to naturalists, he who has a large heart is more largely endowed with valour than he who has a small one. Then, as this is the case, and as the knight did really die, how comes it that he now moans and sighs from time to time as if he were still alive?" As he said this, the wretched Durandarte cried out in a loud voice,
"O cousin Montesinos, 'twas my last request of thee, when my soul hath left the body, and that lying dead I be, with thy poniard or thy dagger cut the heart from out my breast, and bear it to Belerma. This was my last request."
On hearing which, the venerable Montesinos fell on his knees before the unhappy knight, and with tearful eyes exclaimed, "Long since, Señor Durandarte, my beloved cousin, long since have I done what you bade me on that sad day when I lost you. I took out your heart as well as I could,
not leaving an atom of it in your breast.
I wiped it with a lace handkerchief, and I took the road to France with it, having first laid you in the bosom of the earth with tears enough to wash and cleanse my hands of the blood that covered them, after wandering among your bowels. And more by token, O cousin of my soul, at the first village I came to after leaving Roncesvalles, sprinkled a little salt upon your heart to keep it sweet, and bring it, if not fresh, at least pickled, into the presence of the Lady Belerma, whom, together with you, myself, Guadiana, your squire, the duenna Ridera, and her 7 daughters and 2 nieces, and many more of your friends and acquaintances,
the sage Merlin has been keeping enchanted here these many years.
And although more than 500 have gone by, not one of us has died.
Ridera and her
daughters and nieces alone are missing, and these, because of the tears they shed, Merlin, out of the compassion he seems to have felt for them, changed into so many lakes, which to this day in the world of the living, and in the province of La Mancha, are called the lakes of Ridera. The 7 daughters belong to the kings of Spain, and the 2 nieces to the knights of a very holy order, called the Order of Saint John. Guadiana, your squire, likewise bewailing your fate, was changed into a river of his own name, but when he came to the surface and beheld the son of another heaven, so great was his grief at finding he was leaving you, that he plunged into the bowels of the earth. However, as he cannot help following his natural course,
he from time to time
comes forth and shows himself to the sun and the world.
The lakes aforesaid send him their waters,
and with these and others that come to him, he makes a grand and imposing entrance into Portugal. But for all that, go where he may, he shows his melancholy and sadness, and takes no pride in breeding dainty choice fish, only coarse and tasteless sorts, very different from those of the golden Tagus. All this that I tell you now, O cousin mine, I have told you many times before, and as you make no answer, I fear that either you believe me not, or do not hear me, whereat I feel God knows what grief. I have now news to give you, which, if it serves not to alleviate your sufferings, will not in any wise increase them.
Know that you have here before you, open your eyes, and you will see,
that great knight of whom the sage Merlin has prophesied such great things, that Don Quixote of La Mancha, I mean, who has again, and to better purpose than in past times, revived in these days knight-errantry, long since forgotten,
and by whose intervention and aid it may be we shall be disenchanted.
For great deeds are reserved for great men. "And if that may not be," said the wretched Durandarte in a low and feeble voice, "if that may not be, then, my cousin, I say, patience and shuffle." And turning over on his side, he relapsed into his former silence without uttering another word. And now there was heard a great outcry and lamentation, accompanied by deep sighs and bitter sobs. I looked round, and through the crystal wall I saw passing through another chamber a procession of 2 lines of fair damsels all clad in mourning, and with white turbans of Turkish fashion on their heads. Behind, in the rear of these, there came a lady, for so from her dignity she seemed to be, also clad in black, with a white veil so long and ample that it swept the ground. Her turban was twice as large as the largest of any of the others. Her eyebrows met, her nose was rather flat, her mouth was large but with ruddy lips, and her teeth, of which at times she allowed a glimpse, were seen to be sparse and ill set, though as white as peeled almonds. She carried in her hands a fine cloth, and in it, as well as I could make out, a heart that had been mummied, so parched and dried was it. Montesinos told me that all those forming the procession were the attendants of Durandarte and Belerma, who were enchanted there with their master and mistress, and that the last, she who carried the heart in the cloth, was the Lady Belerma, who, with her damsels, 4 days in the week, went in procession singing, or rather weeping, dirges over the body and miserable heart of his cousin, and that if she appeared to me somewhat ill-favoured or not so beautiful as fame reported her, it was because of the bad nights and worse days that she passed in that enchantment, as I could see by the great dark circles round her eyes, and their sickly complexion. Her sallowness and the rings round her eyes," said he, "are not caused by the periodical ailment usual with women, for it is many months and even years since she has had any, but by the grief her own heart suffers because of that which she holds in her hand perpetually, and which recalls and brings back to her memory the sad fate of her lost lover. Were it not for this, hardly would the great Dulcinea del Toboso, so celebrated in all these parts, and even in the world, come up to her for beauty, grace, and gaiety." "Hold hard!" said I at this. "Tell your story as you ought, Señor Don Montesinos, for you know very well that all comparisons are odious, and there is no occasion to compare one person with another. The peerless Dulcinea del Toboso is what she is, and the Lady Dona Belerma is what she is and has been, and that's enough." To which he made answer, "Forgive me, Señor Don Quixote, I own I was wrong and spoke unadvisedly in saying that the Lady Dulcinea could scarcely come up to the Lady Belerma, for it were enough for me to have learned, by what means I know not, that you are her knight, to make me bite my tongue out before I compared her to anything save heaven itself." After this apology, which the great Montesinos made me, my heart recovered itself from the shock I had received in hearing my lady compared with Belerma.
"Still I wonder," said Sancho, "that your worship did not get upon the old fellow, and bruise every bone of him with kicks, and pluck his beard until you didn't leave a hair in it."
"Nay, Sancho, my friend," said Don Quixote, "it would not have been right in me to do that, for we are all bound to pay respect to the aged, even though they be not knights, but especially to those who are, and who are enchanted. I only know I gave him as good as he brought in the many other questions and answers we exchanged." "I cannot understand, Señor Don Quixote," remarked the cousin here, "how it is that your worship, in such a short space of time as you have been below there, could have seen so many things, and said and answered so much."
"How long is it since I went down?" asked Don Quixote. "Little better than an hour," replied Sancho. "That cannot be," returned Don Quixote. because night overtook me while I was there, and day came, and it was night again, and day again, 3 times, so that, by my reckoning, I have been 3 days in those remote regions beyond our ken."
"My master must be right," replied Sancho, "for as everything that has happened to him is by enchantment, maybe what seems to us an hour would seem 3 days and nights there."
"That's it,"
said Don Quixote. "And did your worship eat anything all that time, señor?" asked the cousin.
"I never touched a morsel,"
answered Don Quixote,
"nor did I feel hunger, or think of it."
"And do the enchanted eat?" said the cousin.
"They neither eat," said Don Quixote,
"nor are they subject to the greater excrements,
though it is thought that their nails, beards, and hair grow."
"And do the enchanted sleep now, señor?" asked Sancho.
"Certainly not," replied Don Quixote. "At least, during those 3 days I was with them, not one of them closed an eye, nor did I either."
"The proverb, 'Tell me what company thou keepest, and I'll tell thee what thou art,' is to the point here," said Sancho. "Your worship keeps company with enchanted people that are always fasting and watching. What wonder is it, then, that you neither eat nor sleep while you are with them? But forgive me, señor, if I say that of all this you have told us now, may God take me, I was just going to say the devil, if I believe a single particle."
"What?" said the cousin. "Has Señor Don Quixote then been lying? Why, even if he wished it, he has not had time to imagine and put together such a host of lies."
"I don't believe my master lies," said Sancho.
"If not, what dost thou believe?"
asked Don Quixote.
"I believe," replied Sancho, "that this Merlin, or those enchanters who enchanted the whole crew your worship says you saw and discoursed with down there, stuffed your imagination or your mind with all this rigmarole you have been treating us to, and all that is still to come."
"All that might be, Sancho," replied Don Quixote.
"But it is not so, for everything that I have told you I saw with my own eyes, and touched with my own hands."
"But what will you say when I tell you now how, among the countless other marvellous things Montesinos showed me, of which at leisure and at the proper time I will give thee an account in the course of our journey, for they would not be all in place here, he showed me 3 country girls who went skipping and capering like goats over the pleasant fields there, and the instant I beheld them I knew one to be the peerless Dulcinea del Toboso, and the other 2 those same country girls that were with her and that we spoke to on the road from El Toboso. I asked Montesinos if he knew them, and he told me he did not."
"But he thought they must be some enchanted ladies of distinction, for it was only a few days before that they had made their appearance in those meadows."
"But I was not to be surprised at that, because there were a great many other ladies there of times past and present, enchanted in various strange shapes, and among them he had recognized Queen Guinevere and her dame Quintanona, she who poured out the wine for Lancelot when he came from Britain." When Sancho Panza heard his master say this he was ready to take leave of his senses, or die with laughter, for, as he knew the real truth about the pretended enchantment of Dulcinea, in which he himself had been the enchanter and concocter of all the evidence, he made up his mind at last that, beyond all doubt, his master was out of his wits and stark mad, so he said to him,
"It was an evil hour,
a worse season, and the sorrowful day when your worship, dear master mine, went down to the other world, and an unlucky moment when you met with Señor Montesinos, who has sent you back to us like this. You were well enough here above in your full senses, such as God had given you, delivering maxims and giving advice at every turn, and not as you are now, talking the greatest nonsense that can be imagined."
"As I know thee, Sancho,"
said Don Quixote, "I heed not thy words." "Nor I your worship's," said Sancho, "whether you beat me or kill me for those I have spoken, and will speak if you don't correct and mend your own. But tell me,
while we are still at peace, how or by what did you recognize the lady our mistress? And if you spoke to her, what did you say, and what did she answer?"
"I recognized her," said Don Quixote, "by her wearing the same garments she wore when thou didst point her out to me. I spoke to her, but she did not utter a word in reply; on the contrary, she turned her back on me and took to flight, at such a pace that crossbow bolt could not have overtaken her. I wished to follow her, and would have done so had not Montesinos recommended me not to take the trouble, as it would be useless, particularly as the time was drawing near when it would be necessary for me to quit the cavern. He told me, moreover, that in course of time he would let me know how he and Belerma, and Durandate, and all who were there, were to be disenchanted. But of all I saw and observed down there, what gave me most pain was, that while Montesinos was speaking to me, one of the two companions of the hapless Dulcinea approached me on one without my having seen her coming, and with tears in her eyes said to me in a low agitated voice, 'My lady Dulcinea del Toboso kisses your worship's hands, and entreats you to do her the favour of letting her know how you are, and being in great need, she also entreats your worship as earnestly as she can to be so good as to lend her half a dozen reals, or as much as you may have about you, on this new dimity petticoat that I have here, and she promises to repay them very speedily.' I was amazed and taken aback by such a message, and turning to Señor Montesinos, I asked him, 'Is it possible, Señor Montesinos, that persons of distinction under enchantment can be in need?' To which he replied, 'Believe me, Señor Don Quixote, that which is called need is to be met with everywhere, and penetrates all quarters and reaches everyone, and does not spare even the enchanted. And as the lady Dulcinea del Toboso sends to beg those 6 reals, and the pledge is to all appearance a good one, there is nothing for it but to give them to her, for no doubt she must be in some great strait.'
'I will take no pledge of her,' I replied, 'nor yet can I give her what she asks, for all I have is 4 reals.'
Which I gave. They were those which thou, Sancho, gavest me the other day to bestow in alms upon the poor I met along the road. And I said, 'Tell your mistress, my dear, that I am grieved to the heart because of her distresses, and wish I was a Foucard to remedy them, and that I would have her know that I cannot be, and ought not be, in health, while deprived of the happiness of seeing her and enjoying her discreet conversation, and that I implore her as earnestly as I can to allow herself to be seen and addressed by this her captive servant and forlorn knight. Tell her, too, that when she least expects it, she will hear it announced that I have made an oath and vow, after the fashion of that which the Marquis of Mantua made to avenge his nephew Baldwin, when he found him at the point of death in the heart of the mountains, which was, not to eat bread off a tablecloth, and other trifling matters which he added until he had avenged him. And I will make the same, to take no rest, and to roam the 7 regions of the earth more thoroughly than the Infante Don Pedro of Portugal ever roamed them, until I have disenchanted her. All that and more you owe my lady,' the damsel's answer to me,
And taking the 4 reals,
instead of making me a curtsy, she cut a caper, springing 2 full yards into the air."
"Oh, blessed God!" exclaimed Sancho aloud at this.
"Is it possible that such things can be in the world, and that enchanters and enchantments can have such power in it as to have changed my master's right senses into a craze so full of absurdity? Oh, señor, señor, for God's sake, consider yourself, have a care for your honour, and give no credit to this silly stuff that has left you scant and short of wits." "Thou talkest in this way because thou lovest me, Sancho," said Don Quixote, "and not being experienced in the things of the world, everything that has some difficulty about it seems to thee impossible. But time will pass, as I said before, and I will tell thee some of the things I saw down there which will make thee believe what I have related now, the truth of which admits of neither reply nor question. Chapter 24, wherein are related 1,000 trifling matters, as trivial as they are necessary to the right understanding of this great history. He who translated this great history from the original written by its first author, Cide Hamete Benengeli, says that on coming to the chapter giving the adventures of the cave of Montesinos, he found written on the margin of it, in Hamete's own hand, these exact words: "I cannot convince or persuade myself that everything that is written in the preceding chapter could have precisely happened to the valiant Don Quixote, and for this reason, that all the adventures that have occurred up to the present have been possible and probable. But as for this one of the cave, I see no way of accepting it as true, as it passes all reasonable bounds. For me to believe that Don Quixote could lie, he being the most truthful gentleman and the noblest knight of his time, is impossible. He would not have told a lie though he were shot to death with arrows. On the other hand, I reflect that he related and told this story with all the circumstances detailed, and that he could not in so short a space have fabricated such a vast complication of absurdities. If then this adventure seems apocryphal, it is no fault of mine, and so, without affirming its falsehood or its truth, I write it down. Decide for thyself in thy wisdom, reader, for I am not bound, nor is it in my power to do more. Though certain it is, they say, that at the time of his death he retracted, and said he had invented it, thinking it matched and tallied with the adventures he had read of in his histories." And then he goes on to say, the cousin was amazed as well at Sancho's boldness as at the patience of his master, and concluded that the good temper the latter displayed arose from the happiness he felt at having seen his lady Dulcinea, even enchanted as she was, because otherwise the words and language Sancho had addressed to him deserved a thrashing. For indeed he seemed to him to have been rather impudent to his master, to whom he now observed, "I, Señor Don Quixote of La Mancha, look upon the time I have spent in travelling with your worship as very well employed, for I have gained 4 things in the course of it. The first is that I have made your acquaintance, which I consider great good fortune. The second is that I have learned what the cave of Montesinos contains, together with the transformations of Guadiana and of the lakes of Ridera, which will be of use to me for the Spanish Ovid that I have in hand. The third, to have discovered the antiquity of cards, that they were in use at least in the time of Charlemagne, as may be inferred from the words you say Durandarte uttered when, at the end of that long spell while Montesinos was talking to him, he woke up and said, 'Patience and shuffle.' This phrase and expression he could not have learned while he was enchanted, but only before he had become so in France, and in the time of the aforesaid Emperor Charlemagne. And this demonstration is just the thing for me for that other book I am writing, the Supplement to Polidore Vergil, on the invention of antiquities, for I believe he never thought of inserting that of cards in his book, as I mean to do in mine, and it will be a matter of great importance, particularly when I can cite so grave and veracious an authority as Señor Durandarte. And the fourth thing is, that I have ascertained the source of the river Guadiana, heretofore unknown to mankind." "You are right," said Don Quixote, "but I should like to know, if by God's favour they grant you a license to print those books of yours, which I doubt, to whom do you mean to dedicate them?" "There are lords and grandees in Spain to whom they can be dedicated," said the cousin. "Not many," said Don Quixote, "not that they are unworthy of it, but because they do not care to accept books and incur the obligation of making the return that seems due to the author's labour and courtesy. One prince I know who makes up for all the rest, and more. How much more, if I venture to say, perhaps I should stir up envy in many a noble breast. But let this stand over for some more convenient time, and let us go and look for some place to shelter ourselves in tonight." "Not far from this," said the cousin. "There is a hermitage, where there lives a hermit, who they say was a soldier, and who has the reputation of being a good Christian and a very intelligent and charitable man. Close to the hermitage he has a small house which he built at his own cost, but though small it is large enough for the reception of guests."
Has this hermit any hens, do you think? asked Sancho.
"Few hermits are without them," said Don Quixote, "for those we see nowadays are not like the hermits of the Egyptian deserts who were clad in palm leaves and lived on the roots of the earth. But do not think that by praising these I am disparaging the others. All I mean to say is that the penances of those of the present day do not come up to the asceticism and austerity of former times, but it does not follow from this that they are not all worthy. At least I think them so, and at the worst the hypocrite who pretends to be good does less harm than the open sinner." At this point they saw approaching the spot where they stood a man on foot, proceeding at a rapid pace, and beating a mule loaded with lances and halberds. When he came up to them he saluted them, and passed on without stopping. Don Quixote called to him, "Stay, good fellow, you seem to be making more haste than suits that mule." "I cannot stop, señor," answered the man, "for the arms you see I carry here are to be used tomorrow, so I must not delay. God be with you. But if you want to know what I am carrying them for, I mean to lodge tonight at the inn that is beyond the hermitage, and if you be going the same road you will find me there, and I will tell you some curious things. Once more, God be with you." And he urged on his mule at such a pace that Don Quixote had no time to ask him what these curious things were that he meant to tell them; and as he was somewhat inquisitive, and always tortured by his anxiety to learn something new, he decided to set out at once, and go and pass the night at the inn, instead of stopping at the hermitage, where the cousin would have had them halt. Accordingly they mounted, and all three took the direct road for the inn, which they reached a little before nightfall. On the road the cousin proposed they should go up to the hermitage to drink a sup. The instant Sancho heard this he steered his Dapple towards it, and Don Quixote and the cousin did the same. But it seems Sancho's bad luck so ordered it that the hermit was not at home, for so a sub-hermit they found in the hermitage told them. They called for some of the best. She replied that her master had none, but that if they liked cheap water she would give it with great pleasure.
"If I found any in water," said Sancho, "there are wells along the road where I could have had enough of it. Ah, Camacho's wedding, and plentiful house of Don Diego, how often do I miss you!" Leaving the hermitage, they pushed on towards the inn, and a little farther they came upon a youth who was pacing along in front of them at no great speed, so that they overtook him. He carried a sword over his shoulder, and slung on it a budget or bundle of his clothes apparently, probably his breeches or pantaloons, and his cloak and a shirt or two, for he had on a short jacket of velvet with a gloss like satin on it in places, and had his shirt out. His stockings were of silk, and his shoes square-toed as they wear them at court. His age might have been 18 or 19. He was of a merry countenance, and to all appearance of an active habit, and he went along singing seguidillas to beguile the wearisomeness of the road. As they came up with him he was just finishing one, which the cousin got by heart, and they say ran thus: "I'm off to the wars for the want of pence, oh, had I but money I'd show more sense." The first to address him was Don Quixote, who said, "You travel very airily, sir gallant. Whither bound, may we ask, if it is your pleasure to tell us?" To which the youth replied, "The heat and my poverty are the reason of my travelling so airily, and it is to the wars that I am bound." "How poverty?" asked Don Quixote. "The heat one can understand." "Señor," replied the youth, "in this bundle I carry velvet pantaloons to match this jacket. If I wear them out on the road, I shall not be able to make a decent appearance in them in the city, and have not the wherewithal to buy others.
and so for this reason, as well as to keep myself cool, I am making my way in this fashion to overtake some companies of infantry that are not 12 leagues off, in which I shall enlist, and there will be no want of baggage trains to travel with after that to the place of embarkation, which they say will be Cartagena. I would rather have the king for a master, and serve him in the wars, than serve a court pauper."
"And did you get any bounty now?" asked the cousin.
"If I had been in the service of some grandee of Spain, or personage of distinction," replied the youth, "I should have been safe to get it, for that is the advantage of serving good masters, that out of the servants' hall men come to be ancients or captains, or get a good pension. But I, to my misfortune, always served place hunters and adventurers, whose keep and wages are so miserable and scanty that half went in paying for the starching of one's collars. It would be a miracle indeed if a page volunteer ever got anything like a reasonable bounty."
"And tell me, for heaven's sake," asked Don Quixote, "is it possible, my friend, that all the time you served you never got any livery?"
"They gave me 2," replied the page, "but just as when one quits a religious community before making profession, they strip him of the dress of the order, and give him back his own clothes, so did my masters return me mine, for as soon as the business on which they came to court was finished, they went home and took back the liveries they had given merely for show."
"What spilliceria, as an Italian would say," said Don Quixote; "but for all that, consider yourself happy in having left court with as worthy an object as you have, for there is nothing on earth more honorable or profitable than serving, first of all, God, and then one's king and natural lord, particularly in the profession of arms, by which, if not more wealth, at least more honor is to be won than by letters, as I have said many a time. For though letters may have founded more great houses than arms, still those founded by arms have I know not what superiority over those founded by letters, and a certain splendor belonging to them that distinguishes them above all. And bear in mind what I am now about to say to you, for it will be of great use and comfort to you in time of trouble. It is, not to let your mind dwell on the adverse chances that may befall you, for the worst of all is death, and if it be a good death, the best of all is to die. They asked Julius Caesar, the valiant Roman emperor, what was the best death? He answered, that which is unexpected, which comes suddenly and unforeseen. And though he answered like a pagan, and one without the knowledge of the true God, yet, as far as sparing our feelings is concerned, he was right. For suppose you are killed in the first engagement or skirmish, whether by a cannon ball or blown up by mine, what matters it? It is only dying, and all is over, and according to Terence, a soldier shows better dead in battle than alive and safe in flight, and the good soldier wins fame in proportion as he is obedient to his captains and those in command over him. And remember, my son, that it is better for the soldier to smell of gunpowder than of civet, and that if old age should come upon you in this honourable calling, though you may be covered with wounds and crippled and lame, it will not come upon you without honour, and that such as poverty cannot lessen, especially now that provisions are being made for supporting and relieving old and disabled soldiers. For it is not right to deal with them after the fashion of those who set free and get rid of their black slaves when they are old and useless, and turning them out of their houses, under the pretence of making them free, make them slaves to hunger, from which they cannot expect to be released except by death. But for the present I won't say more than get ye up behind me on my horse as far as the inn, and sup with me there, and tomorrow you shall pursue your journey, and God give you as good speed as your intentions deserve." The page did not accept the invitation to mount, though he did that to supper at the inn. And here they say Sancho said to himself, "God be with you for a master. It is possible that a man who can say things so many and so good as he has said just now, can say that he saw the impossible absurdities he reports about the cave of Montesinos? Well, well, we shall see." And now,
Just as night was falling, they reached the inn, and it was not without satisfaction that Sancho perceived his master took it for a real inn, and not for a castle as usual. The instant they entered, Don Quixote asked the landlord after the man with the lances and halberds, and was told that he was in the stable seeing to his mule, which was what Sancho and the cousin proceeded to do for their beasts, giving the best manger and the best place in the stable to Rocinante. End of chapter 24. Recording by John Leader, Bloomington, Illinois.
And 26 of Don Quixote Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Don Quixote Volume 2 by Miguel de Cervantes Saavedra. Translated by William Ormsby. Chapter 25. Wherein is set down the braying adventure, and the droll one of the puppet showman, together with the memorable divinations of the divining ape. Don Quixote's bread would not bake, as the common saying is, until he had heard and learned the curious things promised by the man who carried the arms. He went to seek him where the innkeeper said he was, and having found him, bade him say now at any rate what he had to say in answer to the question he had asked him on the road. "The tale of my wonders must be taken more leisurely, and not standing," said the man. "Let me finish foddering my beast, good sir, and then I'll tell you things that will astonish you." "Don't wait for that," said Don Quixote. "I'll help you in everything." And so he did, sifting the barley for him and cleaning out the manger, a degree of humility which made the other feel bound to tell him, with a good grace, what he had asked. So seating himself on a bench, with Don Quixote beside him, and the cousin, the page, Sancho Panza, and the landlord, for a senate and an audience, he began his story in this way. You must know that in a village 4 leagues and a half from this inn, it so happened that one of the regidors, by the tricks and roguery of a servant girl of his, it's too long a tale to tell, lost an ass, and though he did all he possibly could to find it, it was all to no purpose. A fortnight might have gone by, so the story goes, since the ass had been missing, when, as the regidor who had lost it was standing in the plaza, another regidor of the same town said to him, "Pay me for good news, gossip, your ass has turned up." "That I will, and well, gossip," said the other, "but tell us where has he turned up?" "In the forest," said the finder. "I saw him this morning without pack saddle or harness of any sort, and so lean that it went to one's heart to see him. I tried to drive him before me to bring him to you, but he is already so wild and shy that when I went near him he made off into the thickest part of the forest. If you have a mind that we two should go back and look for him, let me put up this she-ass at my house, and I'll be back at once." "You will be doing me a great kindness," said the owner of the ass, "and I'll try to pay it back in the same coin." It is with all these circumstances, and in the very same way I am telling it now, that those who know all about the matter tell the story. Well, then, the 2 regidors set off on foot, arm in arm, for the forest, and coming to the place where they hoped to find the ass, they could not find him, nor was he to be seen anywhere about, search as they might. Seeing, then, that there was no sign of him, the regidor who had seen him said to the other, "Look here, gossip, a plan has occurred to me, by which, beyond a doubt, we shall manage to discover the animal, even if he is stowed away in the bowels of the earth, not to say the forest. Here it is. I can bray to perfection, and if you can ever so little, the thing's as good as done." "Ever so little, did you say, gossip?" said the other. "By God, I'll not give in to anybody, not even to the asses themselves." "We'll soon see," said the second regidor, "for my plan is that you should go to one side of the forest, and I the other, so as to go all round about it; and every now and then you will bray, and I will bray, and it cannot be but the ass will hear us, and answer us if he is in the forest." To which the owner of the ass replied, "It's an excellent plan, I declare, gossip, and worthy of your great genius." and the two separating as agreed, it so fell out that they brayed almost at the same moment, and each, deceived by the braying of the other, ran to look, fancying the ass had turned up at last. When they came in sight of one another, said the loser, "Is it possible, gossip, that it was not my ass that brayed?" "No, it was I," said the other. "Well, then, I can tell you, gossip," said the ass's owner, "that between you and an ass there is not an atom of difference as far as braying goes, for I never in all my life saw or heard anything more natural." "Those praises and compliments belong to you more justly than to me, gossip," said the inventor of the plan; "for, by the God that made me, you might give a couple of brays odds to the best and most finished brayer in the world. The tone you have got is deep, your voice is well kept up as to time and pitch, and your finishing notes come thick and fast. In fact, I own myself beaten, and yield the palm to you, and give in to you in this rare accomplishment." "Well, then," said the owner, "I'll set a higher value on myself for the future, and consider that I know something, as I have an excellence of some sort. For though I always thought I brayed well, I never supposed I came up to the pitch of perfection you say." "And I say, too," said the second, "that there are rare gifts going to loss in the world, and that they are ill bestowed upon those who don't know how to make use of them." "Ours," said the owner of the ass, "unless it is in cases like this that we have now in hand, cannot be of any service to us, and even in this God grant they may be of some use." So saying they parted, and took to their braying once more, but every instant they were deceiving one another, and coming to meet one another again, until they arranged by way of countersign, so as to know that it was they and not the ass, to give two brays one after the other. In this way, doubling the brays at every step, they made the complete circuit of the forest, but the lost ass never gave them an answer, or even the sign of one. How could the poor ill-starred brute have answered, when, in the thickest part of the forest, they found him devoured by wolves? As soon as he saw him, his owner said, "I was wondering he did not answer, for if he wasn't dead he'd have brayed when he heard us, or he'd have been no ass. But for the sake of having heard you bray to such perfection, gossip, I count the trouble I have taken to look for him well bestowed, even though I have found him dead." "It's in a good hand, gossip," said the other. "If the abbot sings well, the acolyte is not much behind him." So they returned disconsolate and hoarse to their village, where they told their friends, neighbours, and acquaintances what had befallen them in their search for the ass, each crying up the other's perfection in braying. The whole story came to be known and spread abroad through the villages of the neighbourhood, and the devil, who never sleeps, with his love for sowing dissensions and scattering discord everywhere, blowing mischief about and making quarrels out of nothing, contrived to make the people of the other towns fall to braying whenever they saw anyone from our village, as if to throw the braying of our regidors in our teeth. Then the boys took to it, which was the same thing for it as getting into the hands and mouths of all the devils of hell, and braying spread from one town to another in such a way that the men of the braying town are as easy to be known as blacks are to be known from whites, and the unlucky joke has gone so far that several times the scoffed have come out in arms in a body to do battle with the scoffers, and neither king nor rook, fear nor shame, can mend matters. Tomorrow or the day after, I believe, the men of my town, that is, of the braying town, are going to take the field against another village 2 leagues away from ours, one of those that persecute us most. And that we may turn out well prepared I have bought these lances and halberds you have seen. These are the curious things I told you I had to tell, and if you don't think them so, I have got no others." And with this the worthy fellow brought his story to a close. Just at this moment there came in at the gate of the inn a man entirely clad in chamois leather, hose, breeches, and doublet, who said in a loud voice, "Señor host, have you room? Here's the divining ape and the show of the release of Melisendra just coming." "Odds body," said the landlord, "why, it's Master Pedro! We're in for a grand night." I forgot to mention that the said Master Pedro had his left eye and nearly half his cheek covered with a patch of green taffety, showing that something ailed all that side. "Your worship is welcome, Master Pedro," continued the landlord, "but where are the ape and the show, for I don't see them?" "They are close at hand," said he in the chamois leather. but I came on first to know if there was any room." "I'd make the Duke of Alva himself clear out to make room for Master Pedro," said the landlord. "Bring in the ape and the show. There's company in the inn to-night that will pay to see that and the cleverness of the ape." "So be it, by all means," said the man with the patch. "I'll lower the price, and be well satisfied if I only pay my expenses. And now I'll go back and hurry on the cart with the ape and the show." And with this he went out of the inn. Don Quixote at once asked the landlord what this Master Pedro was, and what was the show, and what was the ape he had with him. Which the landlord replied, "This is a famous puppet showman, who for some time past has been going about this Mancha de Aragon, exhibiting a show of the release of Melisendra by the famous Don Gaiferos, one of the best and best represented stories that we have seen in this part of the kingdom for many a year. He has also with him an ape of the most extraordinary gift ever seen in an ape or imagined in a human being, for if you ask him anything, he listens attentively to the question, and then jumps on his master's shoulder, and pressing close to his ear tells him the answer which Master Pedro then delivers. He says a great deal more about things past than about things to come, and though he does not always hit the truth in every case, most times he is not far wrong, so that he makes us fancy he has got the devil in him. He gets 2 reals for every question if the ape answers; I mean if his master answers for him after he has whispered into his ear; and so it is believed that this same Master Pedro is very rich. He is a gallant man, as they say in Italy, and good company, and leads the finest life in the world, talks more than 6, drinks more than a dozen, and all by his tongue, and his ape, and his show." Master Pedro now came back, and in a cart followed the show and the ape, a big one, without a tail, and with buttocks as bare as felt, but not vicious looking. As soon as Don Quixote saw him, he asked him, "Can you tell me, Sir Fortune Teller, what fish do we catch, and how it will be with us? See, here are my 2 reals." And he bade Sancho to give them to Master Pedro; but he answered for the ape and said, "Señor, this animal does not give any answer or information touching things that are to come. Of things past he knows something, and more or less of things present." "Gad," said Sancho, "I would not give a farthing to be told what's past with me, for who knows that better than I do myself? And to pay for being told what I know would be mighty foolish. But as you know things present, here are my 2 reals, and tell me, most excellent Sir Ape, what is my wife Teresa Panza doing now, and what is she diverting herself with?" Master Pedro refused to take the money, saying, "I will not receive payment in advance, or until the service has been first rendered." And then with his right hand he gave a couple of slaps on his left shoulder, and with one spring the ape perched himself upon it, and putting his mouth to his master's ear began chattering his teeth rapidly; and having kept this up as long as one would be saying a credo, with another spring he brought himself to the ground, and at the same instant Master Pedro ran in great haste, and fell upon his knees before Don Quixote, and embracing his legs exclaimed, "These legs do I embrace as I would embrace the 2 pillars of Hercules, O illustrious reviver of knight errantry, so long consigned to oblivion! O never yet duly extolled knight, Don Quixote of La Mancha, courage of the faint-hearted, prop of the tottering, arm of the fallen, staff and counsel of all who are unfortunate." Don Quixote was thunderstruck, Sancho astounded, the cousin staggered, the page astonished, the man from the braying town agape, the landlord in perplexity, and in short everyone amazed at the words of the puppet showman, who went on to say, "And thou, worthy Sancho Panza, the best squire and squire to the best knight in the world, be of good cheer, for thy good wife Teresa is well, and she is at this moment hackling a pound of flax; and more, by token she has at her left hand a jug with a broken spout that holds a good drop of wine, with which she solaces herself at her work." "That I can well believe," said Sancho; "she is a lucky one, and if it was not for her jealousy I would not change her for the giantess Andadona, who by my master's account was a very clever and worthy woman. My Teresa is one of those that won't let themselves want for anything, though their heirs may have to pay for it." "Now I declare," said Don Quixote, "he who reads much and travels much sees and knows a great deal. I say so because what amount of persuasion could have persuaded me that there are apes in the world that can divine as well as I have seen now with my own eyes? For I am that very Don Quixote of La Mancha this worthy animal refers to, though he has gone rather too far in my praise. But whatever I may be, I thank heaven that it has endowed me with a tender and compassionate heart, always disposed to do good to all and harm to none." "If I had money," said the page, "I would ask Señor Ape what will happen me in the peregrination I am making." To this Master Pedro, who had by this time risen from Don Quixote's feet, replied, "I have already said that this little beast gives no answer as to the future; but if he did, not having money would be of no consequence, for to oblige Señor Don Quixote here present, I would give up all the profits in the world. And now, because I have promised it, and to afford him pleasure, I will set up my show and offer entertainment to all who are in the inn, without any charge whatever." As soon as he heard this, the landlord, delighted beyond measure, pointed out a place where the show might be fixed, which was done at once. Don Quixote was not very well satisfied with the divinations of the ape, as he did not think it proper that an ape should divine anything, either past or future; so while Master Pedro was arranging the show, he retired with Sancho into a corner of the stable, where, without being overheard by anyone, he said to him, "Look here, Sancho, I have been seriously thinking over this ape's extraordinary gift, and have come to the conclusion that beyond doubt this Master Pedro, his master, has a pact, tacit or express, with the devil." "If the packet is express from the devil," said Sancho, "it must be a very dirty packet, no doubt; but what good can it do Master Pedro to have such packets?" "Thou dost not understand me, Sancho," said Don Quixote; "I only mean he must have made some compact with the devil to infuse this power into the ape, that he may get his living, and after he has grown rich he will give him his soul, which is what the enemy of mankind wants. This I am led to believe by observing that the ape only answers about things past or present, and the devil's knowledge extends no further; for the future he knows only by guesswork, and that not always; for it is reserved for God alone to know the times and the seasons, and for him there is neither past nor future; all is present. This being as it is clear that this ape speaks by the spirit of the devil; and I am astonished they have not denounced him to the Holy Office, and put him to the question, and forced it out of him by whose virtue it is that he divines; because it is certain this ape is not an astrologer, neither his master nor he sets up, nor knows how to set up, those figures they call judiciary, which are now so common in Spain that there is not a jade or page or old cobbler that will not undertake to set up a figure as readily as pick up a knave of cards from the ground, bringing to naught the marvellous truth of the science by their lies and ignorance. I know of a lady who asked one of these figure schemers whether her little lapdog would be in pup and would breed, and how many and of what colour the little pups would be; to which señor astrologer, after having set up his figure, made answer that the bitch would be in pup, and would drop 3 pups, one green, another bright red, and the third party coloured, provided she conceived between 11 and 12 either of the day or night, and on a Monday or Saturday; but as things turned out, 2 days after this the bitch died of a surfeit, and señor planet ruler had the credit all over the place of being a most profound astrologer, as most of these planet rulers have." "Still," said Sancho, "I would be glad if your worship would make Master Pedro ask the ape whether what happened your worship in the cave of Montesinos is true, for, begging your worship's pardon, I, for my part, take it to have been all flam and lies, or at any rate something you dreamt." "That may be," replied Don Quixote; "however, I do what you suggest, though I have my own scruples about it." At this point Master Pedro came up in quest of Don Quixote, to tell him his show was now ready, and to come and see it, for it was worth seeing. Don Quixote explained his wish, and begged him to ask his ape at once to tell him whether certain things which had happened to him in the cave of Montesinos were dreams or realities, for to him they appeared to partake of both. Upon this Master Pedro, without answering, went back to fetch the ape, and, having placed it in front of Don Quixote and Sancho, said, "See here, señor ape, this gentleman wishes to know whether certain things which happened to him in the cave called the cave of Montesinos were false or true. On his making the usual sign, the ape mounted on his left shoulder, and seemed to whisper in his ear, and Master Pedro said at once, "The ape says that the things you saw, or what happened to you in that cave are, part of them false, part true, and that he only knows this, and no more, as regards this question. But if your worship wishes to know more, on Friday next he will answer all that may be asked him, for his virtue is at present exhausted, and will not return to him till Friday, as he has said." "Did I not say, señor," said Sancho, "that I could not bring myself to believe that all your worship said about the adventures in the cave was true, or even the half of it?" "The course of events will tell, Sancho," replied Don Quixote. "Time, that discloses all things, leaves nothing that it does not drag into the light of day, though it be buried in the bosom of the earth. But enough of that for the present. Let us go and see Master Pedro's show, for I am sure there must be something novel in it." "Something!" said Master Pedro. "This show of mine has 60,000 novel things in it. Let me tell you, Señor Don Quixote, it is one of the best worth seeing things in the world this day. But operibus credite et non verbis, and now let's get to work, for it is growing late, and we have a great deal to do and to say and show." Don Quixote and Sancho obeyed him, and went to where the show was already put up and uncovered, set all around with lighted wax tapers, which made it look splendid and bright. When they came to it, Master Pedro ensconced himself inside it, for it was he who had to work the puppets, and a boy, a servant of his, posted himself outside to act as showman and explain the mysteries of the exhibition, having a wand in his hand to point to the figures as they came out. And so, all who were in the inn being arranged in front of the show, some of them standing, and Don Quixote, Sancho, the page, and cousin, accommodated with the best places, the interpreter began to say what he will hear or see who reads or hears the next chapter. Chapter 26, wherein is continued the droll adventure of the puppet showman, together with other things in truth right good. All were silent, Tyrians and Trojans. I mean all who were watching the show were hanging on the lips of the interpreter of its wonders, when drums and trumpets were heard to sound inside it, and cannon to go off. The noise was soon over, and then the boy lifted up his voice and said, "This true story which is here represented to your worships is taken word for word from the French chronicles and from the Spanish ballads that are in everybody's mouth, and in the mouth of the boys about the streets. Its subject is the release by Señor Don Gaiferos of his wife Melisendra, when a captive in Spain at the hands of the Moors in the city of Sansuena, for so they called then what is now called Saragossa. And there you may see how Don Gaiferos is playing at the tables, just as they sang it. At tables playing Don Gaiferos sits, for Melisendra is forgotten now. And that personage who appears there with a crown on his head and a sceptre in his hand is the Emperor Charlemagne, the supposed father of Melisendra, who, angered to see his son-in-law's inaction and unconcern, comes in to chide him. And observe with what vehemence and energy he chides him, so that you would fancy he was going to give him half a dozen raps with his sceptre, and indeed there are authors who say he did give them, and sound ones too, and after having said a great deal to him about imperilling his honour by not effecting the release of his wife, he said, so the tale runs, "Enough I've said, see to it now." Observe too how the emperor turns away, and leaves Don Gaiferos fuming, and you see now how in a burst of anger he flings the table and board far from him, and calls in haste for his armour, and asks his cousin Don Roland for the loan of his sword Durindana, and how Don Roland refuses to lend it, offering him his company in the difficult enterprise he is undertaking; but he in his valour and anger will not accept it, and says that he alone will suffice to rescue his wife, even though she were imprisoned deep in the centre of the earth, and with this he retires to arm himself and set out on his journey at once. Now let your worships turn your eyes to that tower that appears there, which is supposed to be one of the towers of the Alcazar of Saragossa, now called the Aljaferia. That lady who appears on that balcony dressed in Moorish fashion is the peerless Melisendra, for many a time she used to gaze from thence upon the road to France, and seek consolation in her captivity by thinking of Paris and her husband. Observe, too, a new incident which now occurs, such as, perhaps, never was seen. Do you not see that Moor, who silently and stealthily, with his finger on his lip, approaches Melisendra from behind? Observe now how he prints a kiss upon her lips, and what a hurry she is in to spit, and wipe them with the white sleeve of her smock, and how she bewails herself, and tears her fair hair as though it were to blame for the wrong. Observe, too, that the stately Moor who is in that corridor is King Marsilio of Sansuena, who, having seen the Moor's insolence, at once orders him, though his kinsman and a great favourite of his, to be seized and given 200 lashes, while carried through the streets of the city according to custom, with criers going before him and officers of justice behind. And here you see them come out to execute the sentence, although the offence has been scarcely committed; for among the Moors there are no indictments nor remands as with us." Here Don Quixote called out, "Child, child, go straight on with your story, and don't run into curves and slants, for to establish a fact clearly there is need of a great deal of proof and confirmation." And said Master Pedro from within, "Boy, stick to your text and do as the gentleman bids you. It's the best plan. Keep to your plain song, and don't attempt harmonies, for they are apt to break down from being over fine." "I will," said the boy, and he went on to say, "This figure that you see here on horseback, covered with a Gascon cloak, is Don Gaiferos himself, whom his wife, now avenged of the insult of the amorous Moor, and taking her stand on the balcony of the tower with a calmer and more tranquil countenance, has perceived without recognizing him. And she addresses her husband, supposing him to be some traveller, and holds with him all that conversation and colloquy in the ballad that runs: If you, Sir Knight, to France are bound, Oh, for Gaiferos ask; which I do not repeat here because prolixity begets disgust. Suffice it to observe how Don Gaiferos discovers himself, and that by her joyful gestures Melisendra shows us she has recognized him; and what is more, we now see she lowers herself from the balcony to place herself on the haunches of her good husband's horse. But ah, unhappy lady, the edge of her petticoat has caught on one of the bars of the balcony, and she is left hanging in the air, unable to reach the ground. But you see how compassionate Heaven sends aid in our sorest need. Don Gaiferos advances, and without minding whether the rich petticoat is torn or not, he seizes her and by force brings her to the ground, and then with one jerk places her on the haunches of his horse, astraddle like a man, and bids her hold on tight and clasp her arms about his neck, crossing them on his breast so as not to fall, for the lady Melisendra was not used to that style of riding. You see, too, how the neighing of the horse shows his satisfaction with the gallant and beautiful burden he bears in his lord and lady. You see how they wheel round and quit the city, and in joy and gladness take the road to Paris. Go in peace, O peerless pair of true lovers! May you reach your longed-for fatherland in safety, and may fortune interpose no impediment on your prosperous journey. May the eyes of your friends and kinsmen behold you enjoying in peace and tranquillity the remaining days of your life, and that they may be as many as those of Nestor." Here Master Pedro called out again and said, "Simplicity, boy! None of your high flights; all affectation is bad." The interpreter made no answer, but went on to say, "There was no want of idle eyes that see everything, to see Melisendra come down and mount, and word was brought to King Marsilio, who at once gave orders to sound the alarm. And see what a stir there is, and how the city is drowned with the sound of bells pealing in the towers of all the mosques." "Nay, nay," said Don Quixote at this, "on that point of the bells Master Pedro is very inaccurate; for bells are not in use among the Moors; only kettle drums, and a kind of a small trumpet somewhat like our clarion. To ring bells this way in Sansuena is unquestionably a great absurdity." On hearing this, Master Pedro stopped ringing, and said, "Don't look into trifles, Señor Don Quixote, or want to have things up to a pitch of perfection that is out of reach. Are there not almost every day 1,000 comedies represented all round us, full of thousands of inaccuracies and absurdities, and, for all that, they have a successful run, and are listened to not only with applause, but with admiration and all the rest of it? Go on, boy, and don't mind. for so long as I fill my pouch, no matter if I show as many inaccuracies as there are motes in a sunbeam." "True enough," said Don Quixote, and the boy went on. "See what a numerous and glittering cloud of horsemen issues from the city in pursuit of the two faithful lovers, what a blowing of trumpets there is, what sounding of horns, what beating of drums and tabors! I fear me they shall overtake them, and bring them back tied to the tail of their own horse, which would be a dreadful sight." Don Quixote, however, seeing such a swarm of Moors and hearing such a din, thought it would be right to aid the fugitives, and standing up he exclaimed in a loud voice, "Never, while I live, will I permit foul play to be practised in my presence on such a famous knight and fearless lover as Don Gaiferos. Halt, ill-born rabble, follow him not nor pursue him, or ye will have to reckon with me in battle." And suiting the action to the word, he drew his sword, and with one bound placed himself close to the show, and with unexampled rapidity and fury began to shower down blows on the puppet troop of Moors, knocking over some, decapitating others, maiming this one and demolishing that; and among many more he delivered one downstroke, which, if Master Pedro had not ducked, made himself small, and got out of the way, would have sliced off his head as easily as if it had been made of almond paste. Master Pedro kept shouting, "Hold hard! Señor Don Quixote! Can't you see they're not real Moors you're knocking down and killing and destroying, but only little pasteboard figures? Look, sinner that I am, how you're wrecking and ruining all that I am worth." But in spite of this Don Quixote did not leave off discharging a continuous rain of cuts, slashes, downstrokes, and backstrokes, and at length, in less than a space of 2 credos, he brought the whole show to the ground, with all its fittings and figures shivered and knocked to pieces, King Marsilio badly wounded, and the Emperor Charlemagne with his crown and head split in two. The whole audience was thrown into confusion, the ape fled to the roof of the inn, the cousin was frightened, and even Sancho Panza himself was in mighty fear, for, as he swore after the storm was over, he had never seen his master in such a furious passion. The complete destruction of the show being thus accomplished, Don Quixote became a little calmer, said, "I wish I had here before me now all those who do not or will not believe how useful knights errant are in the world. Just think, if I had not been here present, what would have become of the brave Don Gaiferos and the fair Melisendra? Depend upon it, by this time those dogs would have overtaken them and inflicted some outrage upon them. So then, long live knight errantry beyond everything living on earth this day." "Let it live and welcome," said Master Pedro at this in a feeble voice, "and let me die, for I am so unfortunate that I can say with King Don Rodrigo, 'Yesterday I was lord of Spain, today I've not a turret left, that I may call mine own. Not half an hour, nay, barely a minute ago, I saw myself lord of kings and emperors, with my stables filled with countless horses, and my trunks and bags with gay dresses unnumbered; and now I find myself ruined and laid low, destitute and a beggar, and above all without my ape, for, by my faith, my teeth will have to sweat for it before I have him caught. And all through the reckless fury of Sir Knight here, who, they say, protects the fatherless, and rights wrongs, and does other charitable deeds, but whose generous intentions have been found wanting in my case only, blessed and praised be the highest heavens. Verily, knight of the rueful figure he must be to have disfigured mine." Sancho Panza was touched by Master Pedro's words, and said to him, "Don't weep and lament, Master Pedro, you break my heart. Let me tell you my master, Don Quixote, is so catholic and scrupulous a Christian that, if he can make out that he has done you any wrong, he will own it, and be willing to pay for it and make it good, and something over and above." "Only let Señor Don Quixote pay me for some part of the work he has destroyed," said Master Pedro, "and I would be content, and his worship would ease his conscience, for he cannot be saved who keeps what is another's against the owner's will, and makes no restitution." "That is true," said Don Quixote, "but at present I am not aware that I have got anything of yours, Master Pedro." "What!" returned Master Pedro, "and these relics lying here on the bare hard ground, what scattered and shattered them but the invincible strength of that mighty arm? And whose were the bodies they belonged to but mine? and what did I get my living by but by them? Now I am fully convinced, said Don Quixote, of what I had many a time before believed, that the enchanters who persecute me do nothing more than put figures like these before my eyes, and then change and turn them into what they please. In truth and earnest, I assure you, gentlemen who now hear me, that to me everything that has taken place here seemed to take place literally, that Melisendra was Melisendra, Don Gaiferos Don Gaiferos, Marsilio Marsilio, and Charlemagne Charlemagne. That was why my anger was roused, and to be faithful to my calling as a knight errant, I sought to give aid and protection to those who fled, and with this good intention I did what you have seen. If the result has been the opposite of what I intended, it is no fault of mine, but of those wicked beings that persecute me; but, for all that, I am willing to condemn myself in costs for this error of mine, though it did not proceed from malice. Let Master Pedro see what he wants for the spoiled figures, for I agree to pay it at once in good and current money of Castile. Master Pedro made him a bow, saying, I expected no less of the rare Christianity of the valiant Don Quixote of La Mancha, true helper and protector of all destitute and needy vagabonds. Master Landlord here and the great Sancho Panza shall be the arbitrators and appraisers between your worship and me, of what these dilapidated figures are worth, or may be worth. The landlord and Sancho consented, and then Master Pedro picked up from the ground King Marsilio of Saragossa with his head off, and said, Here you see how impossible it is to restore this king to his former state, so I think, saving your better judgments, that for his death, decease, and demise, 4 reals and a half may be given me. Proceed, said Don Quixote. Well, then, for this cleavage from top to bottom, continued Master Pedro, taking up the split Emperor Charlemagne, it would not be much if I were to ask 5 reals and a quarter. It's not little, said Sancho. Nor is it much, said the landlord. Make it even, and say 5 reals. Let him have the whole 5 and a quarter, said Don Quixote, for the sum total of this notable disaster does not stand on a quarter more or less. And make an end of it quickly, Master Pedro, for it's getting on to supper time, and I have some hints of hunger. For this figure, said Master Pedro, that is without a nose, and wants an eye, and is the fair Melisendra, I ask, and I am reasonable in my charge, 2 reals and 12 maravedis. The very devil must be in it, said Don Quixote, if Melisendra and her husband are not by this time at least on the French border, for the horse they rode on seemed to me to fly rather than gallop; so you needn't try to sell me the cat for the hare, showing me here a noseless Melisendra, when she is now, maybe, enjoying herself at her ease with her husband in France. God help every one to his own, Master Pedro, and let us all proceed fairly and honestly. And now go on. Master Pedro, perceiving that Don Quixote was beginning to wander and return to his original fancy, was not disposed to let him escape, so he said to him, This cannot be Melisendra, but must be one of the damsels that waited on her; so if I'm given 60 maravedis for her, I'll be content and sufficiently paid. And so he went on, putting values on ever so many more smashed figures, which, after the 2 arbitrators had adjusted them to the satisfaction of both parties, came to 40 reals and 3 quarters, and over and above this sum, which Sancho at once disbursed, Master Pedro asked for 2 reals for his trouble in catching the ape. Let him have them, Sancho, said Don Quixote, not to catch the ape, but to get drunk, and 200 would I give this minute for the good news, to anyone who could tell me positively, that the lady Dona Melisendra and Señor Don Gaiferos are now in France and with their own people. No one could tell us that better than my ape, said Master Pedro, but there's no devil that could catch him now. I suspect, however, that affection and hunger will drive him to come looking for me tonight, but tomorrow will soon be here, and we shall see. In short, the puppet show storm passed off, and all supped in peace and good fellowship at Don Quixote's expense, for he was the height of generosity. Before it was daylight the man with the lances and halberds took his departure, and soon after daybreak the cousin and the page came to bid Don Quixote farewell, the former returning home, the latter resuming his journey, towards which, to help him, Don Quixote gave him 12 reals. Master Pedro did not care to engage in any more palaver with Don Quixote, whom he knew right well; so he rose before the sun, and having got together the remains of his show and caught his ape, he too went off to seek his adventures. The landlord, who did not know Don Quixote, was as much astonished at his mad freaks as at his generosity. To conclude, Sancho, by his master's orders, paid him very liberally, and taking leave of him they quitted the inn at about 8 in the morning, and took to the road, where we will leave them to pursue their journey, for this is necessary in order to allow certain other matters to be set forth, which are required to clear up this famous history. End of chapters 25 and 26.